The galactic combat arena floated in the center of Nexus Station like a metal heart beating with violence. Every night, thousands of beings from across the known universe gathered to watch warriors fight. They came from planets with 3 suns and planets with none. They came with scales and fur and skin made of living crystal. They paid fortunes to watch blood spill on the arena floor. But for the past 4 years, they had come for one reason only. They came to watch. The warrior stood 7 feet tall when he was relaxed. When he was ready to kill, he seemed to grow even larger. His body was covered in chitin armor that grew from his own flesh, black and gleaming like polished obsidian. He had 4 arms, each one ending in hands that could crush stone. His 4 eyes sat in a diamond pattern on his face, and they saw things that other eyes could not see. This was the gift of his species. They could perceive time before it happened, not much, just 3/10 of a second. But in combat, 3/10 of a second was the difference between life and death. Every punch thrown at he saw coming before it arrived. Every kick, every weapon strike, every desperate lunge. He saw them all in that tiny window of future time, and he moved out of the way like water flowing around a stone. In 347 fights, no one had ever touched him, not once. They called him the Untouchable, and the name was not poetry. It was simple fact. Champions from 100 worlds had tried to claim his title. Warriors with cybernetic enhancements that made them faster than thought. Fighters with natural armor thicker than steel. Assassins trained from birth in killing arts that had been perfected over 10,000 years. All of them had fallen. All of them had failed to land a single blow. The bookmakers on Nexus Station had stopped taking bets on his fights. There was no point. The odds were so one-sided that no one would profit from gambling on to win. Some underground markets took bets on how many seconds an opponent would survive. The current record was 11 seconds, held by a blade master who had managed to dodge attacks for that long before his chest was caved in by a 4-armed assault. So when the Terran delegation submitted a challenger's name, the entire station laughed. Humans had only been part of the Galactic Union for 18 months. They were newcomers, still learning the basic protocols of interstellar civilization. Their bodies were soft and fragile. They had no natural weapons, no armor, no special abilities that anyone could detect. Their reflexes were average. Their strength was below average. Their senses were laughably limited compared to most species. Many in the Union wondered why they had been admitted at all. The answer most believed was pity. The humans had developed faster-than-light travel through sheer stubborn persistence rather than any great intelligence. They had stumbled into the galactic community like a child wandering into a room full of adults. It seemed cruel to turn them away, so the Union had accepted them on a probationary basis, expecting little and receiving less. Captain Myra led the Terran delegation to Nexus Station. She was a tall woman with dark skin and close-cropped gray hair. Her eyes were calm in a way that made some species uncomfortable. She walked into the arena registration office on a Tuesday morning, station time, and placed her entry fee on the counter. "We wish to submit a challenger for the arena," she said. The registration official was a species that resembled tall insects with too many legs. He looked down at the human woman with compound eyes that expressed amusement without needing to move. "Against?" he asked. "Yes. You understand that your champion will die." "I understand that is a possibility." They made a clicking sound that served as laughter among his kind. "Not a possibility, human, a certainty. No one has touched the untouchable. Your species is. Forgive me for being direct. Not impressive. What could you possibly send against him?" Captain did not seem offended. She simply pushed the entry fee closer to the official. "His name is Sergeant First Class Elias Cole. Please register him for the next available match." They examined the fee. It was substantial, enough to fund several research expeditions or purchase a small starship. The humans were either very confident or very stupid. Either way, their money spent the same. "Very well," the official said, accepting the fee. "The match is scheduled for 3 days from now. Does your champion require any special atmospheric conditions?" "Standard oxygen-nitrogen mix, Earth standard gravity." "And weapons, armor, combat augmentations to be declared?" Captain shook her head. "None." The clicking laughter came again, louder this time. "Your champion enters against the untouchable with no weapons, no armor. Has he at least been enhanced? Faster reflexes, strengthened bones, anything?" "He pays attention," Captain said. "That is his augmentation." The registration official stared at her for a long moment, trying to determine if this was a joke. The human woman's face remained perfectly serious. Finally, he processed the registration and handed her the confirmation chip. "Your funeral," he said, literally. Captain took the chip and left without another word. Within hours, the news had spread across Nexus Station and beyond. A human had challenged the untouchable. A human with no weapons, no armor, no augmentations. The entertainment networks began running speculative segments about whether this was a suicide, a publicity stunt, or some form of elaborate human humor that other species did not understand. Himself heard the news in his private training chamber. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he processed the information. He had killed many beings. He had faced warriors who inspired genuine fear. But this was the first time he had felt something strange twist in his stomach. It was not fear, it was confusion. Why would a human challenge him? What did they know that he did not? What possible advantage could a soft, slow, unremarkable species believe they held? He dismissed his trainers and sat alone in the silence of his chamber. For the first time in 4 years, the untouchable felt something he did not recognize. He felt uncertain. Across the station, in a small quarters aboard the Terran vessel Persistent Hope, Elias Cole sat in darkness. He was a man of 43 years with gray spreading through his short black hair. His face was weathered, his hands calloused, his eyes holding the quiet stillness of deep water. He was not large. He was not imposing. If he walked through a crowd on any human world, no one would look twice at him. He pulled up the first recording of fights and pressed play. Then he leaned forward, and he began to watch. Elias Cole did not sleep that first night. He did not move from his chair except to use the small bathroom attached to his quarters. The recordings played on the screen in front of him, one after another, fight after fight, death after death. He watched kill a Blade Master in 11 seconds. He watched him destroy a cybernetic warrior from the machine worlds in 6. He watched him tear apart a pack of Thornback hunters who had challenged him together, thinking numbers might succeed where skill had failed. It had not. They died just as quickly as everyone else. By morning, Elias had watched 47 fights. His eyes were dry and burning, but he did not blink. He reached for the cup of cold tea beside him, took a sip without tasting it, and started Fight 48. Captain came to check on him around midday. She entered his quarters without knocking, a privilege she had earned through 20 years of service together. She found him exactly as she had left him 12 hours before. The only change was the number on the screen showing which fight he was watching. "You should eat," she said. "Later." "You should sleep." "Later." She stood behind his chair and watched the screen for a moment. A creature that looked like a walking mountain of muscle was charging at with fists the size of small vehicles. They did not move until the last possible instant, then flowed sideways like smoke, striking the creature's temple with such precision that it dropped mid-stride and did not get up. "Have you found anything?" Captain asked. "Yes." She waited for him to explain. He did not. She had known Elias Cole long enough to understand that he would share his thoughts when they were complete, not before. She left a tray of food beside him and departed without another word. Elias ate while watching Fight 103. The food had no taste. Everything had no taste when he was in this state of concentration. His mind was not in his body. It was inside the recordings, moving through them like a ghost through walls. He had discovered long ago that every fighter had a story written in their body. It was not written in words, but in movement, in the way they shifted their weight before striking, in the tension of muscles that revealed intention before action, in the tiny habits they did not know they had, repeated so many times that they became invisible to everyone, including themselves. Was the most skilled fighter Elias had ever studied. His speed was extraordinary. His technique was nearly perfect. His ability to see the future gave him an advantage that seemed impossible to overcome. But nearly perfect was not perfect. By fight 150, Elias had found the first pattern. Whenever faced a new opponent, he opened with the same combination. 18 strikes delivered in rapid succession, designed to overwhelm and terrify. It was not his most efficient attack. It was not his most deadly. It was his most impressive. He wanted his opponents to understand their doom in the first moments of the fight. This meant that was proud. Pride created patterns. Patterns created weakness. Elias made a note and continued watching. By fight 200, he had found the second pattern. When raised his upper two arms to begin an attack, a small gap appeared in his chitin armor. It was at the joint where his neck met his shoulder, a space no larger than 2 fingers pressed together. The gap only existed for a fraction of a second, only when his arms were in that specific position. No one had ever exploited it because no one had ever been close enough to try while those arms were moving. Elias made another note. By fight 250, he had found the third pattern. Always breathed out at the same point in his attack sequence. It was between the 6th and 7th strike of his opening combination. His body needed the breath to fuel the remaining strikes. During that exhale, his core stability decreased by a tiny amount. Any impact to his midsection during that moment would have 3 times the normal effect. The patterns kept coming. By fight 300, Elias had found 7 distinct habits that repeated without variation. 7 doors that had been left open because no one had ever lived long enough to walk through them. 7 weaknesses that the greatest fighter in the galaxy did not know he possessed. On the second day, Captain returned to find Elias standing in the center of his quarters. His eyes were closed. His hands moved through the air in slow, precise motions, practicing something only he could see. "The recordings are finished," she asked. "I watched them all twice," Elias said without opening his eyes. 347 fights, 694 viewings. "And what did you learn?" Elias was quiet for a moment. His hands continued their slow dance through the air, tracing paths that would become strikes, blocks, movements. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. "He has never been challenged," Elias said. "Not truly. His gift has protected him from ever facing real danger. He has never needed to adapt, to grow, to change his approach. He has been fighting the same fight for 4 years, and he has never realized it." "Is that enough?" Elias opened his eyes. They were calm, clear, certain. His species sees 3/10 of a second into the future. They believe this makes them impossible to hit, but they are wrong. How? The future they see is based on the present. They read their opponent's body and predict what will happen next, but they can only predict what they understand. If they have never seen a technique before, they cannot predict it. If an attack comes from an angle they do not recognize, their gift shows them nothing useful. Captain considered this, and you know techniques he has never seen. I know how to move in ways his species has never encountered. Human joints bend differently than other species. Our muscles generate force through different mechanics. We can rotate our hips and shoulders in combinations that most species find anatomically impossible. Elias paused. More importantly, I know where he will be before he knows it himself. His patterns are his prison. He will perform his opening combination because he has always performed his opening combination. He will raise his arms and create that gap because he does not know the gap exists. He will breathe at the wrong moment because his body demands it. You have seen his future. I have seen his past, Elias corrected. Which is the same thing. A man who has never changed will continue to never change. The past does not predict the future. The past is the future. On the evening of the second day, Elias stopped practicing. He ate a full meal for the first time since arriving. He drank water slowly, hydrating his body for what was to come. Then he lay down on his small bed and fell asleep instantly, like a machine being switched off. Captain watched him through the door for a long moment. She had seen him like this before, years ago, on a colony world where everything had gone wrong. She had watched him walk alone into a situation that should have killed him, armed with nothing but his training and his terrifying ability to read violence before it happened. He had walked out again, the others had not. She closed the door and let him rest. In his private chamber, the untouchable could not sleep. He had watched the recordings of the human's registration. He had studied the man's face, searching for some sign of hidden power, some explanation for this impossible confidence. He had found nothing, just a middle-aged human with gray in his hair and stillness in his eyes. For the second night in a row, the greatest fighter in the galaxy lay awake in the darkness, and he felt something he had never felt before in his life. He felt doubt. The arena filled early on the day of the fight. 60,000 seats surrounded the floating combat platform, and every single one was occupied hours before the match was scheduled to begin. Beings of every species pressed against each other, their differences forgotten in shared anticipation. Cameras from news networks across 200 star systems pointed at the empty platform, broadcasting to billions of viewers who could not be there in person. No one wanted to miss this. The entertainment value was obvious. A soft, slow human against the most deadly warrior the galaxy had ever produced. It was comedy. It was tragedy. It was a spectacle that would be remembered for years, even if it lasted only seconds. The gambling markets had finally opened odds on the fight, and they were 1,000,000 to 1 against the human surviving the first strike. The platform itself was a marvel of engineering. It floated in the center of the arena, held in place by gravity manipulation technology that had taken centuries to perfect. The surface was made of a material that provided perfect traction regardless of what bodily fluids were spilled on it. Hard light barriers surrounded the edges, preventing combatants from falling and ensuring that the violence remained contained. Medical drones hovered nearby, ready to collect the pieces when the fight ended. The atmospheric conditions had been calibrated to favor neither species. Temperature, pressure, oxygen content, gravity. Everything had been measured and balanced to the smallest degree. Neither fighter could claim an environmental advantage. At exactly the appointed hour, the arena lights dimmed. A single spotlight illuminated the entrance tunnel on the eastern side of the platform. Music swelled, deep and martial, the kind of sound that made hearts beat faster and blood run hot. The untouchable emerged into the light. He walked slowly, savoring the moment. His chitin armor gleamed like polished night, drinking in the light and returning nothing. His 4 arms were spread wide, accepting the worship of the crowd. His 4 eyes swept across the 60,000 faces surrounding him, seeing the fear and admiration and hunger that had sustained him for 4 years. He was magnificent. He was terrifying. He was everything a warrior should be. The crowd screamed his name until the arena shook. Climbed onto the platform and stood in the center, exactly where he had stood for 347 previous victories. He knew this ground. He owned this ground. Every centimeter of it had been soaked in the blood of those who had dared to challenge him. The spotlight shifted to the western tunnel. The music faded to silence. For a long moment, nothing happened. The crowd grew quiet, straining to see movement in the darkness of the tunnel. Some wondered if the human had changed his mind. Some wondered if he had simply run away, overwhelmed by the reality of what he had agreed to face. Then Elias Cole walked into the light. The silence became absolute. 60,000 beings held their breath at the same moment, trying to process what they were seeing. The human wore simple black training clothes, cloth pants, a cloth shirt with no sleeves. His feet were bare. His hands were wrapped in white tape, the kind used by primitive fighters to protect their knuckles during training. He carried no weapons. He wore no armor. He had no visible augmentations, no hidden technology, nothing that suggested he was anything more than an ordinary member of his unremarkable species. He looked like someone who had wandered into the arena by mistake. In the broadcast booths, commentators scrambled to find something to say. Some speculated that the human was concealing advanced technology in his clothing. Others suggested that this must be some form of human ritual, perhaps a way of accepting death with dignity. A few simply laughed, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Elias walked to the platform and climbed up without ceremony. His movements were smooth and unhurried. His face showed no emotion. His eyes met four-eyed gaze and did not look away. They studied his opponent with the full power of his precognitive abilities. He read the human's body, searching for hidden tension, for signs of fear, for the subtle signals that always revealed a fighter's true state of mind. He found nothing. The human's heartbeat was slow and steady. His breathing was calm. His muscles were relaxed, ready, but not tense. It was wrong. It was deeply, fundamentally wrong. Every opponent had ever faced had been consumed by fear at this moment. Even the bravest warriors, even those who had accepted their coming death with courage, had shown physical signs of stress that they could not control. It was biology. It was inevitable. But this human stood before the untouchable, as though he were waiting for a transport vehicle, as though nothing unusual were happening at all. "You understand that you will die here," said. His voice boomed through the arena, amplified by the sound system built into the platform. Elias Cole nodded once. His voice was quiet, but the microphones picked it up clearly. "Whenever you're ready." They felt his confusion transform into something like anger. This human was mocking him. That was the only explanation. This pathetic creature from a pathetic species thought he could shake concentration with false confidence. It was an insult. It was beneath contempt. He would make the human suffer for it. Settled into his fighting stance. All four arms positioned themselves in the opening formation he had used for every fight of his career. His legs bent slightly, ready to launch him forward with explosive speed. His precognitive abilities sharpened, reading the future, preparing to see every move the human might attempt and respond before it could happen. Across from him, Elias Cole did something strange. He closed his eyes. The crowd murmured in confusion. The commentators fell silent, unable to explain what they were seeing. Himself froze, his four eyes blinking in sequence, his mind struggling to process this impossible behavior. Who closed their eyes before a fight to the death? But before he could respond, the starting tone sounded through the arena. Sharp, clear, final. The fight had begun. Activated his neural acceleration. Time slowed around him as his precognitive perception engaged fully. He saw the next 0.3 of a second stretch out before him like a road he had traveled 1,000 times. He saw himself launch forward. He saw his opening combination begin. He saw 18 perfect strikes delivered in under 2 seconds. But in that frozen moment, he saw something else. He saw the human's eyes open. And he saw the human smile. Then time resumed and began his attack. His lower right arm swept toward the human's midsection. His upper arms rose to deliver the devastating overhead strikes that had ended so many fights. His body moved with 4 years of muscle memory, following the path it had followed 347 times before. He was 0.03 of a second into his attack when he realized the human was already moving. Not reacting, not responding to what was doing. Moving as though he had known what would do before had done it. The human stepped inside the arc of the first strike, so close that this arm passed harmlessly behind him. He was already inside's guard, already past the reach of those four deadly arms, already in a position that no opponent had ever occupied. He was inside the future that could see, and for the first time in his life, had no idea what would happen next. The first strike came before understood what was happening. Elias Cole's right palm drove upward into the nerve cluster beneath this primary right arm. It was not a hard strike. It did not need to be. The human had spent 30 years learning exactly how much force was required to disable specific points on different species. He had studied anatomy from medical databases during his 3 days of preparation. He knew that this particular cluster, when struck at this precise angle, would cause the entire limb to go dead for approximately 40 seconds. The arm dropped uselessly to the side. This precognition showed him what had happened after it happened. This was impossible. His gift showed the future, not the past. But the human had moved before the future existed. He had acted on something that could not see, could not predict, could not understand. For a fraction of a second, the greatest warrior in the galaxy felt true fear. The second strike came while he was still processing the first. Elias' left hand shot forward, 2 fingers extended like a blade. They found the gap in chitin armor, the tiny space where neck met shoulder, the weakness that only existed when the upper arms were raised. The fingers pressed into the exposed flesh with surgical precision, triggering a pain response so intense that 4 eyes contracted involuntarily. The contraction disrupted his precognitive perception. For 1/10 of a second, he was blind to the future. For 1/10 of a second, he was like everyone else, seeing only what was happening in the present moment. In that moment, the third strike landed. Elias rotated his body in a way that had never seen any species move before. Human spines, he would later learn, could twist independently of human hips. Human shoulders could rotate in directions that most galactic species found anatomically impossible. The motion generated torque from an angle that the defensive instincts did not recognize as an attack. The elbow drove into his midsection at the exact moment he was exhaling between the 6th and 7th strike of his combination. His core stability was compromised. His breath was already leaving his body. The impact folded him forward, driving the air from his lungs, sending shockwaves through organs that had never been touched in combat. The fourth strike targeted his leg. Elias' knee rose in a short, efficient motion that looked almost gentle compared to the violence around it. It connected with the inner thigh of his left leg, precisely where the secondary heart pumped blood to the lower limbs. The impact disrupted the blood flow for a critical instant. The leg buckled, no longer able to support this weight. Began to fall. His precognition returned in that moment, showing him the next 3/10 of a second with terrible clarity. He saw himself collapsing. He saw the human's hand already moving toward his head. He saw the end of everything he had been, everything he had built, everything he had believed about himself. He tried to raise his remaining arms to block. He tried to shift his weight to his right leg. He tried to activate the combat protocols that had been drilled into him since childhood. None of it mattered. The fifth strike was an open palm to his temple. It was the gentlest blow of the 5. It carried just enough force to disrupt the equilibrium centers in his brain without causing permanent damage. This vision blurred. His spatial awareness collapsed. The arena spun around him in a way that his 4 eyes could not process. He hit the platform floor with a sound that echoed through the silent arena. For a long moment, nothing moved. 60,000 beings stared at the impossible scene before them. The untouchable lay on the ground, gasping for breath, one arm dead at his side, his body broken in ways that no opponent had ever managed to break it. Standing over him, barely breathing hard, was a middle-aged human with gray in his hair and tape on his hands. The fight had lasted less than 2 seconds. In the broadcast booths, commentators were screaming questions that no one could answer. How had this happened? What had they just witnessed? Was this some kind of trick, some hidden technology, some impossible deception? The cameras zoomed in on Elias Cole's face, searching for some sign of triumph, some expression of victory. They found nothing. The human looked down at his fallen opponent with an expression that might have been respect, might have been sadness, might have been something that human faces could express and other species could not read. Slowly, Elias extended his hand, stared at the offered hand with four eyes that were still struggling to focus. His species processed shame as physical pain, and the agony coursing through him now was worse than any strike he had received. He had been untouchable. He had been undefeated. He had been a god among warriors. Now he was lying on his back, beaten by a creature that his species considered barely sentient. "You cheated," he said. His voice was weak, broken. "You must have cheated some technology, some weapon, something." Elias shook his head slowly. "No technology, no weapon. I just watched you fight." "That is impossible. My gift shows me the future. I see what my opponents will do before they do it. No one can strike me without me seeing it first." "I know," Elias said. His voice was patient, almost kind. "That is your weakness." His four eyes focused on the human with new intensity. "Explain." "You see the future based on the present. You read your opponent's body and predict what comes next, but you can only predict what you recognize. When I moved in ways your species has never seen. Human bodies work differently than you expected. Your gift showed you a future based on wrong information." There was silence, processing this. "More importantly," Elias continued, "you have been fighting the same way for 4 years. The same opening combination, the same patterns, the same habits. You have never needed to change because no one has ever made you change. I watched all 347 of your fights. I learned your rhythms better than you know them yourself. I did not need to be faster than your gift. I only needed to know what you would do before you knew it." "You saw my future," whispered. "I saw your past," Elias corrected. "And for someone who has never changed, the past and the future are the same thing." The arena remained frozen in silence. No one cheered. No one jeered. The moment was too strange, too profound for such simple reactions. Something had shifted in the understanding of everyone watching. Something about humans. Something about combat. Something about the nature of strength itself. Elias' hand remained extended. "You are a great warrior," he said. "One of the greatest I have ever studied. Your skills are extraordinary. Your gift is remarkable, but you have been a prisoner of your own success. Victory after victory taught you that you did not need to learn. Your gift taught you that you did not need to think. You became predictable because you never had a reason to be anything else." Stared at the hand for a long moment. In his culture, accepting help from one who had defeated you was a sign of deep respect. It was an acknowledgement that the victor had something to teach. It was a surrender not just of the body, but of the mind. He reached up and took the human's hand. Elias pulled him to his feet with surprising strength for such a small creature. The two warriors stood face to face in the center of the arena, victor and vanquished, soft flesh and armored chitin. Two beings from opposite ends of the galaxy connected by a moment that neither would ever forget. The crowd finally found its voice. The sound that emerged was not cheering or booing. It was something else entirely. A murmur of wonder that spread through 60,000 throats and rippled outward to billions of viewers across the stars. The humans, it seemed, were not as unremarkable as everyone had believed. In the days following the fight, Elias Cole became the most studied human in galactic history. Every major news network requested interviews. Every combat academy demanded recordings of his techniques. Every intelligence service across 100 star systems scrambled to reassess their understanding of human capabilities. He declined most of the attention. Captain handled the interviews, the diplomatic requests, the flood of communication that threatened to overwhelm their small delegation. Elias spent his time in his quarters, reading reports from Earth, speaking with his family through long-distance communication channels, living his life as though nothing unusual had happened. This behavior confused the other species even more than his victory had. A warrior who defeated the untouchable should have been celebrating. He should have been claiming the fame and fortune that came with such a triumph. He should have been challenging new opponents, building a legend, establishing himself as the greatest fighter in the galaxy. Instead, he played chess with Captain in the evenings and went to bed early. On the fourth day after the fight, a visitor came to the Terran vessel. Arrived without announcement, his chitin armor had been polished to a high shine, and he wore the ceremonial markings of a seeking wisdom. He stood at the docking port of the human ship and waited in silence until someone came to greet him. Elias met him personally. "I wish to learn," said without greeting. His voice was different now. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something quieter and more uncertain. "I wish to understand what you know, how you see what you see, how you learn what you learn." Elias studied for a long moment. The being who stood before him now was not the same creature he had faced in the arena. Defeat had broken something inside, but it had also opened something. The shell of pride had cracked, and through the cracks, something new was beginning to grow. "Come in," Elias said. They sat together in the small common room of the Terran vessel. Had to fold himself awkwardly to fit into the human-sized furniture, but he made no complaint. His four eyes focused on Elias with an intensity that would have been intimidating to most beings. "How long did it take you," asked, "to learn what you learned, to see what you see?" 30 years, Elias said, "and I am still learning." 30 years, the process this. I have been fighting for 12 years. I became undefeated in my first year. I thought that meant I had nothing left to learn. That is the trap of early success, Elias said. When everything works, there is no reason to question anything. You become frozen in the moment of your first victory, repeating the same patterns forever because they have never failed you. But they did fail me, eventually. Everything fails eventually. The only question is whether you have learned anything else before that moment comes. Was silent for a long time. His four eyes moved slowly, looking at the simple room around him. The metal walls, the worn furniture, the photographs of human faces that decorated the captain's workspace. Everything was small and plain and unremarkable. "Your species," he said finally. "You have no natural weapons, no armor, no gifts like my precognition. How do you survive?" Elias considered the question carefully before answering. "We pay attention," he said. "We watch. We remember. We find patterns in chaos and connections between things that seem unrelated. This is what our evolution gave us instead of claws or shells or speed." "That is why you spent 3 days watching my fights." "Yes, every fighter tells a story through their body. Most fighters cannot read those stories. Humans have learned to read them because we had no other choice. In the ancient past of our world, we were prey animals. We survived by understanding predators better than the predators understood themselves. And now you are predators yourselves." Elias shook his head. "No, we are still prey animals. We just learned that the best defense is to understand everything that might threaten us, to watch, to learn, to prepare." In the weeks that followed, became a constant presence aboard the Terran vessel. He trained with Elias every day, not in combat, but in observation. They watched recordings together, and Elias taught him to see the stories hidden in movement. They studied fighters from a dozen species, and Elias showed him patterns that this precognition had never revealed. It was difficult at first. Had relied on his gift for so long that he had forgotten how to look with his regular eyes. He had forgotten how to think about combat instead of simply reacting to it. He had forgotten that fighting was a conversation, not a monologue. But slowly, he began to understand. Word of the training spread through the combat academies of the galaxy. The untouchable, learning from the human who had touched him, the greatest fighter of his generation, sitting at the feet of a soft-bodied creature from a backwater planet. It was a story that captured imaginations across every world that heard it. Other warriors began to seek out human trainers. Combat schools started requesting human instructors. A species that had been dismissed as unremarkable was suddenly being studied as a source of hidden wisdom. Captain watched this shift with quiet satisfaction. This had been the plan from the beginning, not to defeat, but to change how the galaxy thought about humanity, to show that strength came in many forms, to prove that being soft and slow and unremarkable was not the same as being weak. On the day the Terran vessel finally departed Nexus Station, came to the docking port one last time, he and Elias stood facing each other, former opponents who had become something closer to friends. "I will return to the arena," said, "but I will fight differently now. I will watch as you taught me to watch. I will learn as you taught me to learn. My gift will remain, but it will not be a cage anymore." Elias nodded. "You will be greater than you were before, undefeated again perhaps, but different." "Yes," the paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I have been thinking about what you said, that humans survived by understanding predators, that you are still prey animals who learn to watch and prepare." "Yes, I think you were lying." His four eyes glittered with something that might have been humor. "No prey animal I have ever known could do what you did in that arena. You were not watching me like prey watching a predator. You were watching me like a hunter studying his target." Elias Cole smiled, and for just a moment something ancient and patient looked out through his eyes. "Perhaps," he said, "but it would be rude of us to say so." The two warriors clasped hands one final time. Then Elias turned and walked up the boarding ramp, disappearing into the vessel that would carry him home. Stood at the docking port until the ship had departed. He watched it grow smaller and smaller until it vanished into the vastness of space. Then he turned and walked back toward the arena, his four arms swinging at his sides, his four eyes already beginning to look at the world in new ways. Across the galaxy, billions of beings were asking the same question they had asked since the moment the fight ended. What were humans, really? What made them dangerous? What hidden strengths did they possess that no one had noticed before? The answers would take years to understand. Decades, perhaps. The humans themselves seemed in no hurry to explain. They went about their business quietly, unremarkably, just as they always had. They smiled politely when asked about their combat abilities. They offered to teach anyone who wished to learn. And they paid attention. They were always paying attention. In the end, that was what made them terrifying. Not their strength or speed or any special gift, just their endless, patient willingness to watch and learn and remember, to read the stories written in bodies and movements and patterns, to know their opponents better than their opponents knew themselves. The galaxy had dismissed humans as unremarkable. They were learning, slowly and uncomfortably, that they had been very, very wrong. And somewhere among the stars, traveling home aboard a small vessel, Elias Cole sat in his quarters and pulled up a new set of recordings. There was always more to learn. There were always more patterns to find. There was always another story waiting to be read. He leaned forward and he began to watch.